For my birthday, I rented a beach house and paid for absolutely everything. But as I walked back from the pool, still dripping, towel in hand, I overheard my daughter-in-law talking and it stopped me in my tracks. We're all couples. So we get the master. My parents get the guest room. Your mother is just a lonely old widow. As far as I'm concerned, she can sleep on the floor. I smiled to myself then, already planning the bedtime surprise she clearly had coming. Ashley's laughter came through the beach house windows like nails on a chalkboard. She and David were discussing the sleeping arrangements in the master bedroom, the one I had specifically reserved when I booked the place. According to her, because they were a couple, they automatically got the master. Her parents would get the guest room, and me? I could sleep on the floor. Not even a small bedroom. The literal floor. I had spent $3.00 renting this beautiful Cape Cod beach house for my 70th birthday weekend. I'd invited the whole family and stocked the kitchen with enough food to last days. And now I was finding out how my loving daughter-in-law of 2 years truly felt about me. I stood frozen at the sliding glass door, clutching my towel. Through the open window, I heard David laughing along with her cruel assessment of his own mother, the same son I'd helped through college, supported through his early career struggles, and whose wedding I had practically funded. "You're right, babe," he said. "Mom won't mind. She's pretty adaptable these days." Adaptable. That's what they called it when you were grieving the husband you'd loved for 48 years. When you were trying to figure out how to be a widow and still pretend everything was fine for everyone else's sake. I had arrived 2 hours early that day to set everything up perfectly. The fridge was stocked with David's favorite craft beer and all of Ashley's pricey organic groceries. I'd placed fresh flowers in every room. I even bought hypoallergenic pillows for the guest room, the room I assumed would be for Ashley's parents, Richard and Linda, who were arriving that evening. And the master bedroom. I had chosen it intentionally. It had the best ocean view and a soaking tub that would help my arthritic joints. I'd been looking forward to that room for weeks. It was supposed to be a tiny comfort for me on what would have been Harold's 74th birthday weekend, too, but apparently, wanting a real bedroom in the house I paid for was presumptuous. Ashley's voice rang out again through the warm summer air. "Besides, at her age, how much sleep does she need? She'll probably be up at 5 anyway, wandering around making noise." I was 70, not 90, and honestly in better shape than most people half my age. I swam, did yoga, and lived independently. But in Ashley's mind, I was some frail, inconvenient burden who should be grateful for a piece of carpet. From the guest room, I could hear Richard's familiar laugh. Ashley's parents were already settling into a room far nicer than the one she thought I deserved in my own rental. That's when I smiled, not the polite smile I'd perfected over years of keeping the peace. This was different, sharper, the kind of smile that would have worried them if they'd seen it. Because Ashley was about to learn that this lonely old widow still had a few surprises left. And David was about to remember exactly whose name was on the lease. For this little slice of paradise, the weekend had only just begun. And my ungrateful family had no idea what I had in store. I slipped in through the kitchen door, my wet feet silent on the polished hardwood. The house was exactly as advertised: white walls, nautical blues, that expensive, effortless coastal elegance. Too bad they were all about to find out that this privilege came with conditions. I went straight to my purse and pulled out my phone and the folder of paperwork I'd brought with me. When you've planned something for months, you tend to come prepared. The rental agreement, the insurance policy, every contract, it was all under my name, Margaret Peterson. All paid for with my money. From the guest room, I heard Richard and Linda unpacking, their voices warm and appreciative. They were lovely people, which only made their daughter's behavior more baffling. Upstairs, Ashley called out, "David, bring my suitcase up here. I want to unpack before dinner." In the 3 years since Harold died, I'd noticed a shift. They talked around me instead of to me. Ashley made family plans without asking for my input, then presented them as final decisions. And David, my sweet boy, had started speaking to me in that cautious tone people use when they think someone isn't quite all there. It hadn't always been like this. When David first brought Ashley home 2.5 years ago, I'd been thrilled. She was beautiful, ambitious, articulate, everything I had hoped for in a partner for my son. Her parents, Richard and Linda, had been wonderful during our first meeting, warm, accomplished, down-to-earth people who clearly adored their daughter. But somewhere along the way, especially after their whirlwind marriage just 6 months later, something shifted. Maybe it began when they bought their first house and I offered to help with the down payment. Or when Harold got sick during his final year and I spent more time at their place, clinging to family for comfort while managing his treatments. Perhaps it started after Harold died and I became, in their eyes, more of a reminder of mortality than an actual person with her own needs and feelings. Footsteps on the stairs snapped me out of my thoughts. Showtime. Double quote. So, there you are, Mom. David walked into the kitchen looking every bit the successful financial advisor. Expensive polo, perfectly pressed khaki shorts, that easy confidence he'd always worn like a second skin. We were wondering where you went. Just grabbing some water after my swim, I said lightly, lifting the glass. The pool is wonderful. Perfect temperature. Richard and Linda stepped out of the guest room then, both looking refreshed and grateful. Richard, distinguished with silver hair and kind eyes. And Linda, perfectly put together in the way of women who haven't worked outside the home but treat being a wife and mother as an art. Margaret, this place is absolutely incredible, Linda said warmly, using my preferred name, unlike her daughter. You've really outdone yourself. Richard and I are so grateful you included us in your birthday celebration. Their genuine appreciation only highlighted how jarring Ashley's behavior truly was. Ashley floated down the stairs like she was making an entrance at a gala. Designer sundress, perfectly highlighted hair, subtle but expensive jewelry. Everything about her was curated. Even the way she walked made it seem like she owned the place. Margaret, this place is gorgeous, she said, using the formal name she knew I disliked. Never Mom, never Maggie, like my friends called me. Always Margaret, as if I were a distant acquaintance, not her husband's mother. You really went all out. I'm glad everyone likes it, I replied. I thought we could have a wonderful family celebration. David kissed my cheek, a quick, distracted gesture, more like he was checking it off a list. It's perfect, Mom, really. Ashley and I already moved our things into the master bedroom, and her parents are settled in the guest room. Hope that works for you. Of course, I heard myself say, even as my smile stiffened. I'm just happy everyone's comfortable. Richard looked confused. But Margaret, where will you be sleeping? Did you book another room somewhere? The question hung in the air like a spotlight. Ashley's face tightened just slightly, as if she realized her father had accidentally exposed something she hoped no one would question. Oh, Mom's very low maintenance, Ashley said quickly. She said she'd be fine on the pull-out sofa in the den. Didn't you, Margaret? The lie was smooth, practiced, even. I had never said any such thing and Ashley knew it. Linda frowned. The sofa? But dear, this is your birthday weekend. You should have the nicest room. It's really fine, I said, keeping my polite smile in place while noting the way Ashley's jaw clenched at her mother's reasonable objection. I'm just happy to have everyone together, but Richard was still troubled. Margaret, I feel terrible taking the guest room when you're the one who organized and paid for this whole weekend. Dad, please, Ashley cut in, her voice edged with irritation. Margaret insisted on this arrangement. She specifically said she wanted David and me to have the master suite for our anniversary. Another lie. Their anniversary was 3 months away. Linda's concern deepened. She was clearly picking up on undercurrents she didn't fully understand. A good woman who had somehow raised a daughter who'd become something else entirely. Well, I said pleasantly, I think we should focus on having a lovely family weekend together. Ashley smiled triumphantly. But Linda and Richard exchanged a worried look, proof that unlike their daughter, they possessed actual consciences. And after all, the show had only just begun. Dinner was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive theater. Ashley played hostess at the table I had set, serving food I had bought to guests I had invited. In a house I had rented, everyone, I want to make a toast, Ashley announced, lifting her glass of premium wine, also bought by me, to this beautiful weekend that David and I planned for our dear Margaret. As though I were some fragile old relative they'd taken in out of pity. Instead of the woman bankrolling their 5-star vacation, David raised his glass with enthusiasm. To Mom for being such a good sport about everything, a good sport. As if I were agreeing to something fun. Not giving up a real bed while everyone else enjoyed the accommodations I had provided. Richard and Linda were growing more uncomfortable by the minute. Unlike their daughter, they understood the basic courtesy of acknowledging who was actually hosting the celebration. Wait, Richard said carefully, setting down his wine glass. David, didn't Margaret plan and pay for this entire weekend? She's the one who called and invited us. Ashley's smile didn't falter. But I saw the flicker of irritation in her eyes. Well, of course Margaret helped with some of the logistics, she said smoothly. But David and I really wanted to do something special for her birthday. We've been planning this for months. The lie was so bold, so completely fabricated, that Linda actually blinked. Planning this? She repeated slowly. Ashley, you called me 3 days ago and said Margaret had invited us to her birthday weekend at a beach house. Ashley's expression went through several rapid micro-reactions before settling on wounded innocence. Mom, you're misremembering, she insisted. David and I have been coordinating with Margaret for weeks. That's not what you, Linda began. But Richard gently touched her arm. And in that moment, I saw it happen. Richard and Linda finally recognized exactly what kind of person their daughter had become. Their shared look was painful, a mix of realization and shame. "This is delicious seafood," Richard said diplomatically, clearly trying to shift the conversation. "Margaret, you have excellent taste in restaurants." "Thank you," I said. I wanted everyone to experience the best Cape Cod has to offer. Ashley was struggling to regain control of the narrative, of course. "We all contributed to making this weekend special," she said brightly. "It's really been a family effort." Linda watched her daughter with a new, unreadable expression. "Ashley," she asked softly, "what exactly did you contribute to this weekend?" The question wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a mother seeing the truth of her child. "Well, David and I have been helping with the planning you did 3 days ago," Linda said coolly. "When you called to tell us we were invited to Margaret's birthday party, I excused myself to the kitchen, pretending to get more wine, but really needing a moment to process what I was witnessing." Ashley's own parents were beginning to see through her lies, and they clearly didn't like what they were discovering from the dining room. I heard Linda's measured voice. "Ashley, I think we need to discuss proper gratitude. Margaret has been incredibly generous to include us in her celebration." "Mom, you don't understand the full situation." "I understand perfectly," Richard cut in, his tone firm. "Margaret organized this weekend, paid for everything, and invited us. The least we can do is acknowledge her generosity." Honestly, when I returned with the wine, the entire atmosphere had shifted. Ashley looked trapped, David confused, and Richard and Linda were regarding their daughter with open disappointment. "Margaret," Linda said warmly as I refilled her glass, "Richard and I want you to know how grateful we are to be included in your birthday weekend. This is incredibly generous of you." "It's my pleasure," I said. "I'm truly glad you could both be here." Ashley's smile had stiffened into a brittle mask. She couldn't contradict her own parents without sinking even lower. As I looked around the table, Linda caught my eye, and in her gaze, I saw something like understanding. She was piecing together how her daughter had been treating me, and the realization unsettled her. Let Ashley squirm. Let her try to keep her fabrications intact in front of parents who clearly raised her better than this, because tomorrow was my actual birthday. And I had such lovely surprises planned. I woke before dawn, as usual, and stood on the deck watching the sunrise paint the ocean pink and gold. The house was quiet except for the waves and the soft murmur of voices from the guest room. Richard and Linda were early risers too, through their slightly open window. I heard Linda's troubled voice. "I don't understand. What's happened to her?" The way she spoke about Margaret last night, taking credit for everything. "That's not how we raised her. She's always been ambitious," Richard said quietly. "But this is different. This is dishonest and cruel." They were talking about their daughter, and the pain in their voices was unmistakable. Good parents coming to terms with the reality that their child had become someone they no longer recognized. By 8 o'clock, the house was waking up. Ashley emerged from my bedroom wearing the silk pajamas I'd given her last Christmas. She stretched luxuriously as she admired the ocean view from the master suite's private balcony. "Good morning, Margaret," she called down to where I sat reading on the main deck. "Sleep well on the sofa." The sofa. Not the floor she'd originally suggested, but still a deliberate reminder of the hierarchy she believed she'd established. "Wonderfully," I called back. "Beautiful morning, isn't it?" Richard and Linda appeared next, both looking troubled. Linda walked over with genuine concern. "Margaret, dear, we need to talk about the sleeping arrangements. Richard and I are perfectly comfortable taking the sofa bed, and you should have the guest room. This is your celebration." "That's very kind, but it's not kind," Richard interrupted firmly. "It's basic decency. We're guests in the house you rented. You shouldn't be sleeping on furniture while we occupy a proper bedroom." Ashley appeared at the sliding door, her face tight with controlled panic. "Mom, Dad, we discussed this last night. Margaret specifically requested this arrangement." "No, Ashley," Linda said, her voice carrying unmistakable maternal authority. "You told us Margaret requested it, but we never heard Margaret say any such thing." David wandered in, coffee in hand, sensing tension. "What's going on?" "Your mother-in-law," Richard said deliberately, "is sleeping on a sofa while her guests occupy the bedrooms in the house she rented and paid for. We're discussing how to correct this inappropriate situation." I watched Ashley's face as her own father labeled her behavior inappropriate. The mask slipped, just for a second, revealing something colder and more calculating beneath. "Dad, you don't understand the full context." "Then explain it," Linda demanded. "Explain how it makes sense for Margaret to sleep on furniture during her own birthday weekend." But before she could respond, the first surprise arrived at 9:30. A catering truck from the most exclusive restaurant in Provincetown pulled up, followed by a florist's van and a party rental truck. "Margaret?" Ashley appeared at the sliding door, momentarily forgetting to defend herself. What's all this? My birthday party, dear, I said pleasantly. I thought we should do something really special. Richard and Linda exchanged glances. Realizing that my earlier generosity had only been the warm dash-up. David stepped beside Ashley, his financial advisor brain calculating costs. Mom, this looks extremely expensive. Are you sure? Am I sure I can afford to celebrate my own 70th birthday in style? I laughed, and the sound made all three of them flinch. Oh, David, I think it's time we had a conversation about exactly who can afford what around here. Then came the second surprise. A sleek black sedan pulled into the driveway. Out stepped Patricia Williams, my lawyer, looking as formidable as ever. Carrying a briefcase stuffed with documents we'd been preparing for 6 months, Linda nudged Richard, who straightened like a man finally seeing someone bring order to chaos. Double quotes Mrs. Peterson. Patricia greeted warmly as she climbed the deck stairs. Beautiful property you've rented here. That I rented, I repeated, letting the emphasis land squarely. Yes, it is lovely, isn't it? Ashley's eyes darted nervously between Patricia and me, while her parents watched with growing clarity. This is Patricia Williams, my attorney, I said. Patricia, these are Ashley's parents, Richard and Linda Hartwell, my son David, and my daughter-in-law, Ashley. The word attorney hit everyone differently. Ashley went pale. David stared intently into his coffee. Richard and Linda looked almost relieved. Attorney? Ashley squeaked. Margaret, why do you need an attorney for a birthday party? Mrs. Peterson asked me to bring some documents to review with the family, Patricia explained, her tone warm but unmistakably professional. Nothing dramatic, just some clarifications about property rights and financial responsibilities. We've been working on, Richard nodded approvingly. Someone was finally looking out for my interests. But then the third surprise pulled in. A moving truck. A modest one, just the right size for the belongings Ashley and David had brought for the weekend. I'd arranged for everything to be moved to a charming bed and breakfast down the road. You can't be serious, Ashley whispered, watching workers carry her designer luggage past the windows. Richard and Linda stood frozen, watching their daughter's belongings being carried out as they tried to understand what all of this really meant. Oh, but I am serious, I said, settling back into my deck chair. Patricia, would you mind explaining the legal situation to my family? Patricia checked her notes with a kind of calm, professional satisfaction. Mrs. Peterson is the only person listed on the rental agreement for this property. She alone has the right to determine who stays here. When someone misrepresents their role in planning or paying for an event, it can be grounds for removal. Removal? Linda gasped, staring at her daughter with growing horror. David finally found his voice. Mom, this is insane. We're family, are we? I cut in. Because family members don't usually suggest their mothers sleep on floors. Family members don't steal credit for generosity. And they don't lie to their own parents about who did what. Richard's face grew grim as the truth clicked into place. Ashley, did you tell us that Margaret wanted to sleep on the sofa? Ashley's survival instincts lit up instantly. Dad, this is all a misunderstanding. Margaret's been acting strangely lately and I was just trying to manage what? Linda snapped. Margaret seems perfectly clear thinking to me. She planned this weekend, paid for everything and invited us graciously. What exactly did you think you were managing? Patricia pulled out a document. Perhaps this will help. This is the rental agreement signed solely by Mrs. Peterson, along with receipts for catering, flowers, and all weekend expenses. Total cost, approximately $8,000. Richard went pale. $8,000. Ashley, did you know Margaret was spending that much on this weekend? It wasn't supposed to be that expensive because you weren't paying for it. Linda said quietly, finally seeing the full picture. You took credit for generosity you couldn't afford. Ashley fell to her knees beside my chair, dramatic and desperate. Margaret, please. I didn't mean what I said about the floor. I was just stressed about the arrangements, trying to make sure everyone was comfortable by taking the master bedroom I reserved and paid for. Richard stepped forward, voice heavy with disappointment. Ashley, get up. This is undignified, but Ashley stayed kneeling, grabbing my hands. Please don't throw us out. This is your birthday weekend. We can fix this, can we? I asked softly. Because I heard you quite clearly yesterday. She can sleep on the floor. Those were your exact words about me. Not the sofa. The floor? Linda gasped, horrified. The floor? Ashley, you suggested Margaret sleep on the floor? The silence that followed was suffocating. Even Ashley seemed to realize how awful that sounded out loud in front of her parents. I was joking, she said weakly. It was just a joke between family. No, Richard said firmly. That wasn't a joke. That was cruelty. Patricia cleared her throat gently. Mrs. Peterson has arranged alternative lodging for David and Ashley at the Anchor Inn down the road. Victorian charm, shared facilities, continental breakfast included. Shared bathroom. Ashley choked on a gasp. At your age, I said sweetly. I thought you might enjoy a more authentic experience. Linda looked at her daughter as if seeing her for the first time. Ashley, what have you become? David, desperate now, tried a business-like offer. Mom, if you paid for everything, let me reimburse you. With what money, dear? I asked lightly. David, you've received over $70,000 from me in the last 18 months. Where has it all gone? Richard and Linda turned to their daughter, stunned. $70,000? Richard whispered. Ashley stood slowly, mascara streaking her cheeks. You don't understand. David needed help and you were just what? Linda demanded. Using Margaret's generosity to fund. What, exactly? I looked at this woman who had humiliated me in front of her own parents, who tried to have me sleep on the floor of a home I rented. And I felt something I hadn't felt in years, complete, righteous strength. I want my son back, I said simply. Not the man who lets his wife humiliate his mother. Not the man who's forgotten basic respect and gratitude. Richard nodded. That's entirely reasonable, Margaret, but more than anything, I wanted Ashley to understand that the lonely old widow she underestimated had far more power than she ever imagined. The bed and breakfast called within the hour. Ashley and David had arrived, been shown their room, and Ashley had immediately demanded to speak with the manager about their unacceptable accommodations. Mrs. Peterson, the manager, said when she phoned me, your daughter-in-law seems very upset about the shared bathroom. She's asking if you'll cover the extra charges for a suite upgrade. I was sitting on the deck with Richard and Linda, who had insisted on staying with me to help process everything that had happened. They seemed determined to distance themselves from their daughter's behavior. Absolutely not. I told the manager. They're responsible for any charges beyond the basic room. I understand, she said. They provided a credit card, but it was declined. They're currently discussing their options. After I hung up, Linda shook her head sadly. Margaret, I owe you an enormous apology. We raised Ashley to be better than this. You did raise her to be better, I said gently. I could tell that from the moment you arrived. You're good people. You're horrified by what your daughter has become. Richard stared out at the ocean, disappointment weighing down his face. We never taught her to take credit for other people's generosity, or treat elders with such disrespect. I don't understand where this came from. I've been wondering the same thing for months. I admitted. The Ashley I met 2 years ago felt different. Ambitious, yes, but not cruel. Something changed after she married David. Patricia had stayed with us, wanting to help everyone understand the situation fully. She opened her files with careful professionalism. Mr. and Mrs. Hartwell, there are some things about your daughter's recent behavior that you should know. Mrs. Peterson and I have been investigating some financial irregularities. Linda looked shaken. Financial irregularities? Over the last 18 months, Patricia explained. Ashley has received substantial assistance from Mrs. Peterson, over $70,000, supposedly for mortgage support and household expenses. But the money doesn't appear to have gone where it was intended. Richard's face drained of color. What do you mean? I took a steadying breath. Richard, Linda. About 6 months ago, I noticed that no matter how much help I gave, David and Ashley's financial situation never improved. Patricia and I started looking into where the money was actually going. And Linda's voice was barely a whisper. Oh, Margaret. Patricia continued, checking her notes. Approximately $30,000 did go toward legitimate household expenses. The rest appears to have been redirected to personal purchases, luxury items, and payments toward pre-existing debts. Pre-existing debts? Richard asked sharply. I hesitated, then spoke honestly. These two good people deserved the truth. Ashley entered this marriage with significant financial obligations from her previous relationship. She's been using the money I gave David to pay those debts, while telling him it was for their household. Linda covered her face with her hands. Oh, Margaret, what has she done to your family? My phone rang. David, I could hear Ashley crying in the background, and his voice was tight with panic. Mom, please. We can't afford to stay anywhere else. Our credit cards are maxed out, and we don't have cash for even one night. Then perhaps you should have thought about that before taking credit for a weekend. You couldn't afford to host, I said calmly. Richard motioned for the phone. David, this is Richard Hartwell. Son, you and Ashley need to come back here immediately and have an honest conversation with your mother. A long pause, then, yes, sir. We'll be right there. When David and Ashley returned an hour later, they found Richard and Linda sitting with me and Patricia, united in their concern for my well-being. Ashley looked shattered. Mom, Dad, you can't side with her against me. We're not siding with anyone, Linda said firmly. We're siding with decency. Margaret has been incredibly generous to this family, and you've repaid that generosity with disrespect and dishonesty. David looked bewildered and desperate. What dishonesty, Ashley? What are they talking about? Richard stood, every inch the disappointed father. David, your wife suggested your mother sleep on the floor of the house your mother rented and paid for. Then she lied to us about who organized this weekend and tried to take credit for your mother's generosity. The words hit David like physical blows. Sleep on the floor? Ashley, you told me Mom preferred the sofa bed. Ashley's face collapsed as she realized her parents had finally told the truth, and there's more. Patricia said gently. About the $70,000 in assistance and where it's actually been going. I watched my son's face as the truth finally cracked through years of manipulation and excuses. The reckoning had only just begun, but for the first time in 2 years. I wasn't facing it alone. Richard and Linda had chosen truth over blind loyalty to their daughter. And that gave me hope that this family might still be saved. Patricia stepped out to her car and returned with more files. The result of our 6-month investigation. Richard and Linda stood on the deck, watching her spread documents across my dining room table. Their faces were heavy with the knowledge that they were about to learn even more unsettling truths about Ashley. What exactly are we looking at? Richard asked as we gathered around the table. Research, I said quietly. When you're 70 and recently widowed, people assume you're helpless. They forget that some of us had full careers long before we became wives and mothers. What kind of research? Linda asked, her voice tight with dread. Patricia looked up from organizing her files. Mrs. Peterson hired me 6 months ago when she noticed financial irregularities that concerned her. We've been quietly investigating Ashley's background and the family's financial patterns. I joined them at the table. 6 months of careful work spread out before us. Richard and Linda deserved to know the full scope of who their daughter had become. Background investigation. Linda whispered. On Ashley? When someone marries into your family and immediately begins manipulating financial assistance, while isolating the benefactor from their support systems. It's worth doing some homework, I explained gently. Patricia opened her first folder with professional precision. Your daughter's history shows concerning patterns. The first document she revealed was a divorce decree from Connecticut, dated just 8 months before Ashley met David. She had been married to a man named Robert Hutchkins, a successful architect. She was divorced that recently? Richard gasped. She told us she'd been single for 2 years when she met David. The divorce was contentious. Patricia continued. Mr. Hutchkins cited financial irresponsibility, undisclosed debts, and misrepresentation of expenses. Ashley had been opening credit accounts without his knowledge. Linda stared at the documents, horror growing in her eyes. She's done this before, Patricia said quietly. At least twice, that we can document. We found evidence of 2 previous relationships with financially stable men. Both ended with the men reporting financial manipulation and trust violations. Patricia pulled out more files. There's also this. She showed us a photograph of Ashley at what looked like a charity gala. Her arm wrapped around a distinguished silver-haired gentleman. The date stamp was from 3 years ago. Who is he? Richard asked, though his voice already held dread. James Morrison, 68 years old, widower. His adult children contacted me during our investigation. They're part of a support group for families affected by financial elder abuse. Morrison died of a heart attack last year, shortly after changing his will to include Ashley. Linda made a small, pained sound. Dear God, what kind of person did we raise? My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. We need to talk about Ashley urgently. I have information about her other victims. MBI showed it to Patricia, who quickly traced the number. Marcus Brennan, she said. Ashley's brother. According to records, he's been trying to contact you for 6 months through various channels. Richard looked up sharply. Marcus, Ashley's brother Marcus? You know him? I asked. We haven't seen Marcus in over 2 years, Linda said slowly. Ashley told us he was having mental health issues, that we should avoid contact with him for our own well-being. The pattern was becoming painfully clear. Ashley had been isolating herself from anyone who might expose her, even her own family. Based on our investigation, Patricia continued, Ashley hasn't just been misusing Mrs. Peterson's assistance. She's been researching Margaret's assets, including life insurance policies and investment accounts. I felt the blood drain from my face. Harold's life insurance was my security, the foundation of my independence. She's been what? Richard's voice was dangerous now. Through David, Patricia said gently. We found paperwork where she encouraged him to look into family financial assistance options. Based on your policies. Nothing illegal, just deeply concerning. Given the pattern, Linda was crying quietly now, crushed by the weight of her daughter's deception. My phone rang, David's number, but Ashley's panicked voice answered, Margaret. We need to come back immediately. There's been some kind of mistake with our accounts and we need help sorting this out. I'm sure you do, I said calmly. But I'm busy reviewing some very illuminating financial documents with your parents. The line went silent. We could all hear Ashley's sharp intake of breath. Ashley, I continued pleasantly. Your parents are here, and they're very interested in understanding your recent behavior patterns. I hung up and turned to Richard and Linda. Both looked devastated but resolute. They're coming back, I said. Richard rose slowly, determination hardening his face. Good, it's time our daughter faced the consequences of her choices. Linda nodded through her tears. Margaret, whatever happens next, please know we're on your side. Ashley may be our daughter, but what she's done to you and to David is unforgivable. But the conversation we were about to have would reveal that Ashley's deceptions ran even deeper than any of us imagined. Marcus Brennan arrived just as Ashley and David's car pulled into the driveway. A lean man in his 40s with tired eyes. He carried a briefcase and the expression of someone who'd been holding heavy secrets for far too long. Mrs. Peterson, thank you for agreeing to see me, he said, glancing nervously at the car pulling in. I've been trying to reach you for months, but Ashley has been intercepting my communications. Richard and Linda immediately stood up. Marcus, Linda rushed forward to embrace him. We've missed you so much. Ashley said that you didn't want to see us. Marcus's face tightened. Ashley has been lying to you about me, just like she's been lying about everything else. Patricia verified his ID while David and Ashley climbed the deck stairs. Ashley's face drained of color the moment she saw her brother sitting with her parents and me. Marcus, what are you doing here? Cleaning up your mess, as usual, he replied coldly. Mr. and Mrs. Hartwell deserve to know what their daughter has become. David looked confused, his eyes darting around. Ashley, I thought your brother was in therapy and couldn't see family. That's what she told you? Marcus gave a bitter laugh. I've been trying to contact this family for months to warn them about Ashley's pattern of behavior. Ashley's panic was clear now. Marcus has issues with boundaries, and the only boundary issue here, Richard cut in firmly, is your complete lack of respect for other people's property, generosity, and dignity. Marcus opened his briefcase and began laying out documents. Mrs. Peterson, your family needs to understand that Ashley doesn't just manipulate finances. She studies people's vulnerabilities and systematically exploits them. He handed me a folder filled with what looked like surveillance notes and photographs. Ashley researches her targets extensively. She learns their routines, their emotional triggers, and their financial situations. Linda stared at her daughter with growing horror. Ashley, what is this? Marcus is mentally unstable, Ashley said desperately. You can't believe anything he says. I can believe documented evidence, Patricia replied, examining the files. These are detailed observations about Mrs. Peterson's daily activities, her social connections, and her financial resources. David leaned in to read over Patricia's shoulder, his face turning gray. Ashley, these are notes about my mother's swimming schedule, her doctor's appointments, her friends. Why would you document all this? I wanted to understand the family dynamics better. You were mapping out vulnerabilities, Marcus said flatly. It's what you do. You did it to Robert Hutchkins, to James Morrison, and now to this family. Richard's voice was steady but arctic cold. Ashley, I want you to explain to me why you have surveillance notes on Margaret. They're not surveillance notes. Ashley's composure was unraveling fast. I was just trying to be a good daughter-in-law, understanding Mom's needs. By suggesting she sleep on the floor? Linda's voice sliced through Ashley's excuses like a blade. The mention of the floor landed like a bomb. David stared at his wife in shock. Sleep on the floor? Ashley, you told me Mom preferred the sofa because it was more comfortable for her back. Marcus pulled out more files. Ashley has used this approach before. She isolates her targets from their support systems while positioning herself as indispensable. The goal is complete financial control. Financial control? David's voice was rising now. Ashley, what is he talking about? Patricia checked her notes. Based on our investigation, Ashley has been using your mother's assistance not just for household expenses, but to pay debts from her previous relationships while building new ones. Richard stood, his face flushed with anger. Ashley Marie Hartwell, you will tell us the truth right now. What debts? What previous relationships? The use of her full name, the way her father used to address her when she was in serious trouble, seemed to break something inside her. Ashley collapsed into a chair, her perfect facade finally shattering. I owe money, she whispered. From before David, from Robert, from other people. How much money? Linda demanded. Marcus answered for her. Approximately $90,000 in various debts, legal fees, and settlements from her previous relationships. David went pale. $90,000? Ashley, where did all that debt come from? Life is complicated, David. You don't understand what it costs to maintain. To maintain what? Richard's voice thundered. A lifestyle funded by deceiving good people like Margaret? My phone rang. The police, as I'd expected they were bound to call eventually. Mrs. Peterson. This is Detective Sarah Morrison with the Connecticut State Police. We're investigating financial irregularities involving Ashley Hartwell Peterson. We'd like to speak with her and her family at your earliest convenience. Ashley's face turned white as paper. Detective, I said calmly. We're in Massachusetts for the weekend. But Ashley is here if you need to speak with her, actually. Ma'am, we'd prefer to speak with you first. You may be a victim in a larger pattern of financial manipulation we've been investigating. After I hung up, I looked at everyone around the table. Richard and Linda looked devastated but determined. Marcus looked relieved that the truth was finally surfacing. David looked like he was processing the collapse of everything he believed about his marriage. And Ashley looked exactly like what she was, a cornered predator with nowhere left to run. The silence after the police call broke only when Linda began crying softly. She wasn't mourning her daughter's situation. She was grieving the person she thought Ashley had been. How long have the police been investigating you? Richard asked, his voice hollow. It's not what you think, Ashley said desperately. Robert is just bitter about our divorce. He's trying to cause trouble by reporting financial crimes. Marcus cut her off. Ashley, the police have documentation of a pattern spanning multiple relationships. This isn't about one bitter ex-husband. David stared at his wife like she was a stranger. Ashley, how much of our marriage has been built on lies? David, please, how much? His voice had hardened, his business executive composure finally taking over. Because I'm starting to realize I don't know anything true about you. Patricia pulled out a timeline she'd prepared. David, your wife has been systematically misrepresenting her financial situation from the beginning. The money she claimed she needed for emergencies, household expenses, and investments, most of it went to paying debts from her previous relationships. Richard was pacing now, his anger rising. Ashley, you used this family's generosity to clean up messes from your past while creating new ones. I was trying to start fresh, Ashley sobbed. I wanted to be a good wife to David, but I had obligations you hid from him. Linda said coldly. Obligations you manipulated Margaret into funding without her knowledge. David suddenly stood, his face twisting with realization and disgust. The emergency car repairs that cost $3,000, Ashley. Did our car actually need repairs? Ashley's silence answered for her. The medical bills for your specialist appointments. Silence again. The investment opportunity that required upfront money, David. I can explain how many of the emergencies that required my mother's help were real. David demanded. His voice rising with every word. Marcus checked his files. Based on documentation from Ashley's previous relationships, approximately 70% of her claimed emergencies are fabricated. She creates financial crises to justify requesting assistance. I watched my son's face as the full weight of his wife's deception settled in. Every crisis, every emergency, every plea for help calculated manipulation. David, I said gently. Your wife didn't just lie to you about money. She studied your family, learned our vulnerabilities, and targeted us systematically. Richard nodded grimly. Son, our daughter is not the woman you married. She's not even the woman we raised. She's become something none of us recognize. Ashley made one last desperate attempt. Mom, Dad, please. Yes, I made mistakes with money, but I love David. I love this family. Don't destroy my marriage over financial issues we can work through. Work through? Linda's voice was ice. Ashley, you suggested that Margaret sleep on the floor of a house she rented and paid for. That's not a financial issue. That's a character issue. It was a joke. It was cruelty, Richard said firmly. And it revealed exactly who you've become. David stared at his hands. The weight of everything finally sinking in. Ashley, I have to ask you something. And I need the truth. Did you target my family because we were vulnerable after Dad died? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Even Ashley seemed to understand that any answer would condemn her. Marcus broke the silence. Ashley researches obituaries and social media for recently widowed families with adult children. Men between 35 and 50 are ideal targets. Because they're grieving while trying to support aging parents. David's face crumpled. You targeted me because my father died, David. That's not. You saw a grieving son with a widowed mother and thought, opportunity. David continued, his voice breaking. You didn't fall in love with me. You recruited me. Ashley was crying now. But the tears looked more like frustration than genuine remorse. I did love you, she whispered. I do love you. No, David said quietly, standing with a new, steady resolve. You loved what I could provide. You loved access to my mother's generosity and my family's trust. But you never loved me. Richard and Linda stood beside David, unified in choosing truth over their daughter's lies. Ashley, Richard said heavily. You need to leave now, Dad. Please, you've humiliated this family, manipulated a grieving widow, and destroyed your marriage through systematic deception. I'm ashamed to call you my daughter. The words hit Ashley like blows, leaving her with nothing to defend herself. She grabbed her purse and car keys with shaking hands and looked around at all of us one last time. This isn't over, she said, but her voice held no conviction. Yes, I said quietly. It is. Ashley left that evening, driving away into the darkness with nothing but her purse and the clothes on her back. She had finally run out of lies, out of allies, out of excuses. David sat on the deck staring at the ocean, trying to process the wreckage of his marriage and the truth about who his wife really was. Richard and Linda sat on either side of him, protective and grieving in their own way for the son-in-law they had grown to love. How did I miss it? David asked for the third time. How did I not see what she was doing to Mom? Because she's an expert, Marcus said gently. He had stayed to help us understand Ashley's methods. She studies people professionally. She knows how to exploit love, guilt, and family loyalty. But I should have protected Mom instead of enabling Ashley's behavior. Richard placed a firm hand on David's shoulder. Son, you were manipulated by someone who made manipulation her career. That doesn't excuse the choices you made, but it explains them. Linda sat beside me, still trying to absorb the extent of her daughter's deception. Margaret, how do we apologize for what Ashley did to you? How do we make amends for the pain our daughter caused? You already have, I said softly. By choosing truth over loyalty to Ashley. By standing with David when he needed support. By showing me that good people can raise children who choose to become something else entirely. Patricia remained with us to explain the legal implications of Ashley's departure. Mrs. Peterson, we have enough documentation to pursue recovery of most of the misappropriated funds. Ashley's pattern with previous victims makes for a strong civil case. What about the police investigation? David asked. Detective Morrison will want to interview all of you as witnesses. Ashley's activities appear to be connected to a wider investigation into financial elder abuse. Around midnight, the phone rang. David answered it, then handed it to me with a grim expression. It's Detective Morrison. Ashley was arrested at the Massachusetts border trying to cross into New Hampshire. I took the phone calmly. Detective? Mrs. Peterson, we apprehended Ashley Peterson during a traffic stop. She had documents indicating she planned to leave the state permanently. We also found evidence linking her to other ongoing investigations. What kind of evidence? Financial records, identity documents under multiple names, and contact information for potential new targets. Mrs. Peterson, your case helped us uncover a much larger operation. When I hung up, I looked at my family. David, Richard, Linda, and Marcus united now in their relief that Ashley's long-running schemes were finally over. She's not coming back, I said simply. David nodded. Good, I need time to figure out how to rebuild my life without her lies. Richard stood, looking suddenly older. Margaret, Linda, and I want you to know that we consider you family. No matter what happens with David and Ashley's marriage, you've shown more grace and strength than we had any right to expect. You're good people. I told them. Ashley's choices don't reflect on how you raised her. Linda squeezed my hand. We'd like to stay in touch if you'll have us. We lost a daughter tonight, but we'd be honored to keep the friendship we found with you. As we sat together under the stars, it struck me that Ashley's plan to isolate and destroy my family had completely backfired. Instead of breaking us apart, her manipulation had brought together people who truly cared about one another. What happens now? David asked quietly. Now we heal, I said. We rebuild trust slowly and carefully. We remember that family is supposed to be a source of strength, not exploitation. The ocean whispered against the shore, steady and eternal, while I sat surrounded by people who had chosen love over lies and truth over convenience. Ashley had tried to reduce me to a lonely old widow who could sleep on floors instead. She reminded me that I was still Margaret Peterson, strong enough to fight for my family, and wise enough to know the difference between love and manipulation. 3 months later, a letter from the district attorney's office arrived. Ashley had pled guilty to multiple counts of elder financial abuse and fraud spanning 3 states. She was sentenced to 5 years in prison with restitution ordered for all of her victims. I was sitting on my deck when I read the letter while David finished painting my kitchen. He'd moved back into his childhood bedroom temporarily as he sorted out his divorce and the financial wreckage Ashley left behind. Good news? He asked, joining me with 2 cups of coffee. Justice news, I said, handing him the letter. Ashley won't be manipulating any more families for a while. David nodded, quiet and sober. Part of me feels sorry for her. Prison seems harsh, David, I said gently. She studied vulnerable people the way a predator studies prey. Prison isn't harsh, it's appropriate. Richard and Linda had become regular visitors by then. Determined to rebuild the family connection Ashley had tried to destroy. They'd even been helping the authorities connect with other victims of her schemes. The Morrison family called yesterday. I told David, James Morrison's children want to thank us for helping expose Ashley. Our case gave them the evidence they needed for their civil suit. How many victims were there total? David asked. 12 that we know of, I said. The youngest was 62. The oldest was 81. Ashley specifically targeted people going through major life transitions. David grew quiet, trying to absorb the full weight of his ex-wife's crimes. Mom, he said finally. I need to say something I should have said months ago. What's that? I'm sorry. Not just for enabling Ashley, but for losing sight of who you are. You're not a burden or a problem. You're my mother and you deserve respect and love, not manipulation and exploitation. I reached out and took his hand. David, you were manipulated by an expert. What matters is that when you finally saw the truth, you believed it. Yes, it took time, but you got there. And now, we rebuild. Patricia had helped us recover most of what Ashley had taken. And David insisted on repaying every penny he had unknowingly helped her extract. It would take years, but he was determined to make things right. There's something else, David said, pulling an envelope from his pocket. I got this yesterday. It was a job offer from a financial firm in Boston specializing in elder financial protection. They'd heard about our case and wanted David to help develop programs to prevent the kind of manipulation Ashley had mastered. It's perfect, I said after reading it. You'd be helping other families avoid what we went through. I wanted to ask your permission first. He said, the job means traveling, sometimes leaving you alone, David. I interrupted, smiling softly. I'm 70, not helpless. I can manage a few days on my own. He smiled back, the first true smile I'd seen from him in months. Right, I keep forgetting the lonely old widow thing was Ashley's narrative, not reality. Marcus had become part of our extended family as well, visiting often and sharing stories about the sister he'd tried to help for years. Before accepting that she'd chosen a destructive path, you know what the strangest part is? David asked as we watched the sunset melt into brilliant colors. What? I feel free for the first time in 2 years. I didn't realize how much energy it takes to live with someone who's always manipulating you. Freedom is precious, I agreed. Especially when you've forgotten what it feels like. The doorbell rang, and David went to answer it. He returned with Richard and Linda, both holding grocery bags and wearing the warm smiles of people who'd become genuine friends. Sunday dinner ingredient delivery, Linda announced. Hope you don't mind us inviting ourselves again. You're always welcome here, I assured her. This is what family should feel like. As the four of us prepared dinner together, David, Richard, Linda and me, I thought about how much had changed since that weekend at the beach house. Ashley had tried to isolate me, control me, and ultimately get rid of me. Instead, she taught me something important, the depth of my own strength, and the difference between real family and people who manipulate their way into your life. Margaret, Linda said as we set the table. I want you to know something. Having you in our lives has reminded us what healthy family relationships look like. Linda said softly. Ashley's behavior had made us forget. We're all learning together, I replied. David raised his wine glass as we sat down to eat. To second chances, honest conversations, and families that choose each other. To strong women who refuse to be underestimated, Richard added, giving me a nod. To the truth setting us free, Linda finished. We clinked our glasses as the sun set outside my windows, surrounded by people who had chosen love over lies, truth over convenience, and family over manipulation. Ashley had once called me a lonely old widow who could sleep on floors. But sitting at my own table in my own home, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about me, I knew exactly who I was. Margaret Peterson, a woman who'd survived 70 years of challenges and still had the strength to fight for what mattered most. And this time, I'd won. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.